Joining us now to discuss the crypto markets is Tastycrypto Head of Digital Assets, Ryan Grace. Welcome, Ryan.
Hi, Christine Lawrence. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Good morning.
Good morning. So, of course, we're seeing some of the markets react here to this bit of news about Paxos dealing with its BUSD situation. What is going to be the impact overall to the markets? This seems to be, again, it seems to be more of a from at least from the early guesses, is that it might be, in fact, more of a Binance issue. Which, do you think that actually makes things worse than if it's a Paxos issue?
I tend to agree with you. I mean, I think it definitely makes things worse if this is a Binance issue. We see further kind of, we'll call it regulatory scrutiny, I suppose, being imposed by the SEC. You do have that headline risk. And I think that's certainly what's weighing on crypto markets this morning, was weighing on markets into last week. But I also think that that's more of just an immediate concern. I think what you're going to see here, what maybe we are seeing, and I know you alluded to correlations earlier today, but I believe that the macro kind of economic backdrop is still the primary driver here, and really it's Fed policy. And so in addition to some of the SEC headlines that you've seen, we've also seen some slight revisions to CPI higher. I know we have CPI again on Tuesday, expected to come down a little bit. But you're starting to see in the markets a bit of a concern that not so much even a soft landing, but that the Fed isn't going to land here. The economy is going to run hot, and ultimately you're going to see higher interest rates.
Nonetheless, I mean, we have seen issues with unbacked stablecoins before, and that seems to be an underlying concern in the markets. Every time we've had a rally or a spark of interest in these unbacked stablecoins. I'm thinking UST last year, and some would argue Tether back in 2017. That when you have these sort of manias, if you will, for these unbacked stablecoins, we've seen a rise in Bitcoin and other crypto. Do you think, nonetheless, that actually is why we're seeing at least part of this decline here? Is that the idea that maybe some of this rally, is some of the market stability, if you will, was based on, if it were a situation, and I don't know the full numbers on how much Binance pegged USD is out there, but nonetheless, that it's a sort of concern that, oh geez, here's another one, here's another thing, and that actually might drive might separate the correlation yet again, and might separate crypto from, let's say, the equity markets that we saw for a brief period of time when those two markets were trading together.
Yeah, I think so. I think for sure in the short term, it's going to add to volatility. I kind of look at it from a liquidity perspective. In my view, and I think you've alluded to this a little bit, where the more, let's say, stablecoin issuers that you have, in theory, I think the more liquidity we'll see in the market, and maybe the more potential there is for some of those rapid increases in price or that upside volatility that we've seen. And there tends to be a little bit of a correlation with that. So I think in the short term, absolutely, it's going to continue to weigh on sentiment here. But again, I think once we get past this, it's largely going to be a market driven by kind of what's happening with the macro backdrop.
All right, so in January, we saw the crypto markets rally. We're seeing a bit of a correction entering mid-February. Why, in your view, are we seeing the markets pull back? Is it just a correction? Is it temporary? What's the catalyst here?
Yeah, well, I think if you go back to the beginning of the year, my view is that we've largely been in a bear market rally. Historically, they tend to be pretty fierce. You see very large upside volatility. It's tough to trade. And I think that we're coming on the other side of that right now. So I do think, you're seeing some profit taking. Certainly when we look at the price of Bitcoin, had a difficult time really breaking above 24,000. So ran into some significant resistance there. And I think it's going to likely pull back to, maybe the lower end of this range that we've been in. It just unfortunately hasn't been encouraging, just what we've seen here with this pullback in equities as well as in crypto.
So speaking of which, of course, tomorrow we'll be seeing the CPI, and of course, the Fed doesn't necessarily look at CPI. They've kind of made that clear that that's not their number one metric for for judging inflation. Nonetheless, the market seems to want to use it. What do you expect tomorrow? And let's say we get a number that's higher than expected. Just shooting this out there. Do you think that'll have a fundamental, a painful effect on crypto? Do you think that if inflation is in fact higher, way higher, let's say 0.3, 0.4%, do you think that will scare the markets and we might see a sell-off in crypto?
Yeah, I do. I think that would absolutely scare the markets, given the expectation is that you're going to continue to see, at least in the short term, some disinflationary pressures. I think if you just look at the year-over-year comps, mathematically, you're in a period where we should see that annual rate come down. But if, in fact, we do see the monthly increase there that you've described, I think that absolutely introduces volatility into the market. I think that scares traders, because if we go back again to the beginning of January, I think a lot of what we've seen in this market, which I'll continue to say is a bear market rally, has been predicated on this idea that there's going to be a Fed pause, potentially a Fed pivot, given a slowdown in the economy, and that you're ultimately going to see interest rates that are a bit more conducive to liquidity and into upside price action. And so if, in fact, you do get a hotter than expected CPI print here, I think that'll push out the terminal Fed funds rate. I think that causes everyone to quickly reevaluate this rally here and maybe take additional profits where they have them. But I think it certainly scares markets relative to the expectation that we should see inflation come down, even though I think we're still looking for about a 6.2% on headline year over year, which is still pretty high, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
All right, Ryan, we got to wrap it there. But I always like to end it off with do you have a price target for the end of the year on Bitcoin?
Price target for the end of the year. I do think that we will be higher than we are here at the end of the year. So let's say above 25,000 without trying to pick a specific number. I just think in the short term, this is a difficult market. You're going to see a lot more volatility, a lot more chop before we get there.
All right. That was Tastytrade Head of Digital Assets, Ryan Grace.